Welcome back for another deep dive.
This time, we're going to be tackling Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah, this book, it's been around forever, right? Like almost everyone's heard of it.
It's classic for a reason.
So for our listeners out there who maybe haven't read it yet, what's the big idea?
Well, it's all about improving your people skills.
Okay, so not just making friends, but like actually influencing people too.
Exactly. It's about building relationships, understanding people, and communicating effectively.
And I guess that's something that's useful no matter what you do in life, right?
Absolutely. Whether you're in business or just trying to improve your personal relationships, these principles can make a huge difference.
So how did Carnegie come up with all this stuff? Was he like a psychologist or something?
He wasn't a psychologist in the traditional sense, but he was fascinated by success and what made people tick.
Okay.
He spent years studying, interviewing some of the most successful people of his time.
Like who?
Oh, like Thomas Edison, Franklin D. Roosevelt, even movie stars like Clark Gable and Mary Pickford.
He really went all out, huh?
Yeah.
So what did he learn from all these big names?
Well, one of the biggest takeaways was that success isn't just about talent or intelligence.
Okay.
It's about the ability to connect with people and build relationships.
So it's almost like people skills are more important than anything else.
In a way, yeah. Because even if you have all the talent in the world, if you can't communicate effectively or work with others, you're not going to get very far.
I mean, that makes sense when you think about it.
Mm.
I've definitely seen people with tons of potential who just couldn't get out of their own way because they didn't know how to deal with people.
Right. And on the other hand, you see people who might not be the smartest or most talented, but they have this amazing ability to connect with others.
And they end up being incredibly successful.
Exactly. So Carnegie wanted to break down what these successful people were doing and turn it into a set of principles that anyone could apply.
Okay, so kind of like a practical guide to human interaction.
Yeah, exactly. He wanted to give people the tools to improve their relationships and achieve their goals.
So where do we start? What's the first principle?
Well, one of the most fundamental ideas in the book is the importance of showing sincere appreciation.
Okay, so like telling people that you appreciate them.
Yeah, but it goes deeper than that. It's about genuinely recognizing and valuing the people around you.
I think we all like to feel appreciated, right?
Yeah.
But does Carnegie actually say that appreciation can make a real difference?
Oh, absolutely. He tells this story about an employer who had 314 enemies working for him.
314 enemies. Wow, he must have been a real jerk.
Well, he was known for being very critical and never giving any praise. But then he learned about Carnegie's principles and decided to change his approach.
So what did he do?
He started showing appreciation to his employees, thanking them for their work and acknowledging their contributions.
And what happened?
The results were incredible. Those 314 enemies became friends.
That's wild, just from showing a little appreciation.
It just goes to show how powerful a little appreciation can be.
I guess when people feel valued, they're more likely to be happy and productive.
Exactly. And it creates a more positive work environment for everyone.
Now, this all sounds great in theory, but I think some people might be hesitant to show too much appreciation. They might worry about coming across as insincere or even manipulative.
That's a valid concern. And Carnegie actually addresses that in the book. He makes a clear distinction between sincere appreciation and empty flattery.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Sincere appreciation is about genuinely recognizing and valuing the other person's qualities or contributions. It's about seeing the good in them and expressing it authentically.
And flattery is more about trying to get something from the other person, right?
Exactly. It's superficial and insincere, and people can usually see right through it.
So Carnegie's saying that we should focus on being genuine and expressing appreciation in a way that feels authentic.
Right. Because when you're sincere, people can feel it, and it has a much more powerful impact.
So I think we can all agree that appreciation is important. But how does that tie into the idea of influencing people?
Well, when you show appreciation to someone, you're essentially building a relationship with them. You're creating a connection.
Okay.
And when people feel appreciated, they're more likely to be open to your ideas and suggestions.
So it's kind of like you're building trust and rapport.
Exactly. And that's essential if you want to influence someone.
Because people are more likely to listen to someone they trust and respect.
Right. And that's something that Carnegie emphasizes throughout the book. It's not about using tricks or manipulation. It's about building genuine relationships.
So appreciation is like the foundation for everything else.
In a way, yeah. It's the starting point for building strong and lasting connections with people.
And from there, you can start to influence them in a positive way.
Exactly. But of course, there's more to it than just showing appreciation. Carnegie outlines a whole set of principles for understanding people and communicating effectively.
I'm all ears.
Yeah.
Let's dive in and see what else he has to say.
Okay, so let's move on to another important concept from the book,
Okay.
and that is understanding others.
Makes sense. We've talked about appreciation, but I guess understanding goes even deeper than that.
It does. Carnegie believed that one of the most important things you can do is to make people feel important.
But how do you do that?
Well, it starts with truly listening to them, trying to see things from their perspective.
So not just waiting for your turn to talk.
Right. It's about actively engaging with what they're saying and trying to understand their point of view.
I mean, I know I appreciate it when someone really listens to me.
Yeah.
It makes me feel like what I have to say matters.
Exactly. And everyone wants to feel like that. Carnegie even tells the story of Jim Farley.
Who was that?
He was the political mastermind behind FDR's presidential victories.
Oh, wow. Okay, so he must have been pretty good at understanding people.
He was incredible. He had this system for remembering thousands of names.
Thousands.
Yeah. And he would use those names in personal letters, making everyone feel like they mattered.
I've heard that's one of the best ways to make a good impression. Remember someone's name.
Absolutely. Because it
Mhm.
shows that you're paying attention and that you value them as an individual.
So it's not just about remembering names, it's about showing genuine interest in the other person.
Exactly. And that can go a long way in building rapport.
Didn't Carnegie have another story about a businessman who used this technique to get information from a really tight-lipped executive?
He did. This executive was notorious for not sharing any details about his business, but our businessman found a way to break through. He did some research and discovered that the executive was an avid stamp collector.
So he used that as common ground.
Exactly. He struck up a conversation about stamps, and the executive completely opened up.
Wow. So he got the information he needed just by connecting with the guy on a personal level.
It's a perfect example of how understanding someone's interests and passions can unlock doors that would otherwise remain closed.
This is all starting to make sense now.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, when I hear this stuff, it makes me wonder if it's all a bit manipulative. You know, like,
Yeah.
are we just trying to trick people into liking us?
I can see why you'd think that. But I think Carnegie's point is that these principles are most effective when they're applied genuinely.
Okay, so it's not about using tricks or techniques. It's about actually wanting to understand and connect with people.
Exactly. Because when you approach interactions with that mindset, it becomes less about getting something and more about building genuine relationships.
That makes sense. So it's more about a shift in perspective than anything else.
Right. It's about recognizing that everyone has value and that we can all benefit from understanding each other better.
Okay, so we've talked about appreciation and understanding others. But what about actually persuading someone? How do you get them to do what you want?
Well, that brings us to another key principle from the book.
Okay, let's hear it.
Carnegie says that instead of focusing on what you want, you need to talk in terms of what the other person wants.
So highlight their benefits instead of your own needs.
Exactly. He uses the example of a hotel manager who was about to raise the rent by 300%.
Ouch. That's a lot.
It is. And this tenant went to see him, and instead of arguing or pleading his case, he did something completely unexpected.
What did you do?
He sat down with the manager and said, "Let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages for you if you increase the rent."
Wow, that's bold. Did it work?
It did. The manager actually reduced the increase to 50%.
Wow. Just from looking at it from his perspective.
It's a perfect illustration of how appealing to someone's self-interest can be incredibly persuasive.
So it's like you're not trying to force them to do something, you're showing them how it benefits them.
Exactly. And that makes them much more likely to cooperate.
It reminds me of that story about Ralph Waldo Emerson trying to get a calf into the barn.
Ah, yes, a classic example.
He and his son were pushing and pulling, but the calf wouldn't budge. Then the housemaid came along and figured out what the calf wanted.
Which was to suck on her finger.
Right, and she was able to gently lead it into the barn.
It's a perfect analogy for how understanding the other person's wants can help you get what you want.
So it's not about force or manipulation. It's about finding that win-win.
Exactly. And that's what Carnegie is all about.
This is all great stuff, but it's making me realize how often I probably mess this up in my own life.
Well, the good news is that Carnegie offers plenty of advice for handling those situations where things go wrong.
Oh, like what?
We'll dive into that next time.
I can't wait.
So, we were talking about how important it is to really see things from the other person's perspective.
And use that understanding to get what you want.
Right, but it's not always about getting what you want.
Well,
Sometimes it's about resolving conflict and finding a solution that works for everyone.
which I guess is another form of getting what you want.
I guess you could say that. But the point is that understanding the other person's point of view can be incredibly helpful when you're dealing with a disagreement.
Okay, so how does that work in practice?
Well, Carnegie tells this amazing story about John D. Rockefeller Jr.
The oil tycoon.
Yeah, back in 1913, he was dealing with a major coal miners' strike.
That must have been a tense situation.
The miners were demanding better conditions and pay, and Rockefeller, as a stakeholder in the coal industry, was seen as the enemy.
So what did he do?
He did something completely unexpected. Instead of fighting back, he traveled to the mining town and met with the miners.
To argue with them?
No, to listen. He wanted to understand their grievances and see things from their perspective.
So he was trying to build empathy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it worked. The miners were ready for a fight, but Rockefeller's sincerity and willingness to listen totally disarmed them.
So he was able to diffuse the situation just by listening.
It was a key part of it. The miners felt heard and respected, which paved the way for a more peaceful resolution.
That's a pretty powerful example. I guess it shows that sometimes the best way to win an argument is to not argue at all.
Right. It's about finding common ground and working towards a solution that benefits everyone.
Okay, so we've got Rockefeller and the coal miners. But do you have any other examples of this, maybe in a less extreme situation?
Sure. Carnegie tells this funny anecdote about a guy who got pulled over for speeding.
Oh, I've been there.
Instead of arguing with the cop, he admitted he was wrong and said something like, "I know you're just doing your job, officer. I appreciate you keeping the roads safe."
So he was basically buttering up the cop.
You could say that. But it worked. The cop was ready to give him a ticket, but he ended up letting him off with a warning.
So sometimes a little kindness can go a long way.
Absolutely. And it's a lot more effective than arguing and trying to prove you're right.
Okay, so we've talked about understanding others and avoiding arguments. But what about those times when you can't just smooth talk your way out of things? Like if someone's really messed up and you need to address it.
That's a good question. And Carnegie actually has some advice for that, too.
Okay, I'm listening.
He says that if you have to criticize someone, you should do it in a way that doesn't make them defensive.
Because nobody likes to be criticized.
Right. So Carnegie outlines a series of steps to make criticism more effective.
Like what?
Well, first he says you should begin with praise and honest appreciation.
So start by saying something nice.
Exactly. Highlight the person's strengths and accomplishments before you address the areas where they need to improve.
So it's kind of like a sandwich. You put the criticism in between two pieces of praise.
That's a good analogy. It helps to soften the blow and make the person more receptive to your feedback.
Okay, what else?
Carnegie also suggests calling attention to the mistake indirectly instead of directly confronting the person.
So instead of saying, you did this wrong, you might say, I noticed this could be improved.
Exactly. It's a more subtle approach, but it can be just as effective.
And it's less likely to make the person feel attacked.
Right. And that's important because when people feel attacked, they're more likely to shut down and become defensive.
Which makes it harder to actually get your point across.
Exactly. So Carnegie's advice is to be gentle and tactful when you're giving criticism.
Okay, any other tips?
One more. He says you should talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person.
So kind of like leading by example.
Exactly. It shows that you're not perfect and that everyone makes mistakes.
I guess that makes the other person feel less alone in their mistake.
Right. And it also helps to build trust because it shows that you're willing to be vulnerable.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got praise, indirectness, and leading by example.
Oh.
Any other Carnegie-approved ways to give criticism?
The last one is to ask questions instead of giving direct orders.
So instead of saying, do this, you might say, what do you think would be the best way to handle this?
Exactly. It's a much more empowering approach, and it encourages the person to take ownership of the solution.
I like that. It shows that you respect their judgment and that you value their input.
And that's what Carnegie is all about. It's about treating people with respect and understanding, even when you're giving them criticism.
This is all great stuff. It's making me realize how much I still have to learn about dealing with people.
Well, we all do. It's a lifelong process.
True. But I feel like Carnegie gives us a good roadmap to follow.
He does, and the best part is that his principles are just as relevant today as they were nearly a century ago.
So we're not just learning about history, we're learning about ourselves.
Exactly. And that's what makes How to Win Friends and Influence People such a timeless classic. So we've talked about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, we've covered appreciation, understanding others,
Giving constructive criticism.
even navigating conflict.
It seems like there's always more to learn about dealing with people, right?
Absolutely. So what else does Carnegie have for us?
Well, he has this principle that I think is especially relevant today.
Yeah.
In our world of social media, where it feels like everyone's quick to criticize and put others down,
Yeah. It's easy to get caught up in that negativity.
it is. And that's why Carnegie's principle of let the other person save face is so important.
Let the other person save face. What does that mean?
It means recognizing that everyone has an ego, and even when someone is wrong, it's important to allow them to maintain their dignity.
So you're saying don't rub their nose in it.
Exactly. You don't have to crush them just to prove you're right.
I mean, I get that.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's hard to resist the urge to say, I told you so.
I know. But Carnegie argues that it's much more effective to be gracious and let the other person save face.
So how do you do that in practice?
Well, he tells the story of Charles Steinmetz.
Who was that?
He was a brilliant electrical engineer who worked for General Electric.
Okay.
He was a genius in his field, but he was a terrible manager.
Oh, so they had a problem on their hands.
They did. They needed to remove him from his leadership role, but they didn't want to humiliate him.
So what did they do?
They got creative. Instead of demoting him, they gave him a new title, Consulting Engineer of General Electric.
So it was essentially the same work, but with a fancier title.
Exactly. And it allowed Steinmetz to save face and still feel valued by the company.
It's a pretty clever solution.
Mhm.
I guess it shows that you can achieve your goals without having to make someone else feel bad.
Right. It's a win-win situation.
Okay, so we've got saving face. What else does Carnegie talk about?
Well, he has a lot to say about encouragement.
Encouragement.
Yeah, he believes that it's one of the most powerful tools we have for influencing others.
Okay, I'm listening.
He says to praise the slightest improvement and praise every improvement. Be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise.
Wow, that's a lot of praise. Isn't that a bit over the top?
He argues that encouragement is far more effective than criticism when you want to motivate people to improve.
Okay, I could see that.
Yeah.
But do you have any examples?
He tells the story of Enrico Caruso, the famous opera singer.
Oh, I love Caruso.
When he was a boy, people told him he had a terrible voice and would never make it as a singer.
Really?
But his mother believed in him. She constantly praised his efforts, even the smallest improvements.
So she was his biggest fan.
Exactly. And that encouragement fueled his passion and determination. He practiced relentlessly and eventually became one of the most celebrated singers of all time.
That's an inspiring story. It shows that sometimes all it takes is a little bit of belief to help someone achieve their dreams.
Right. And it's a reminder that our words have power. We can choose to build people up or tear them down.
So we should choose to build people up.
Absolutely. And it's not just about praising big accomplishments. It's about recognizing and acknowledging even the smallest steps forward.
Because those small wins can add up to big successes.
Exactly. And that's what Carnegie's all about. It's about helping people reach their full potential.
It seems like we've just scratched the surface of what How to Win Friends and Influence People has to offer.
We have, and that's the beauty of it. It's a book that you can keep coming back to and always find something new and insightful.
So for our listeners out there who haven't read it yet, I highly recommend checking it out.
Me too. It's a classic for a reason.
And even if you have read it before, it's worth revisiting with all of these insights in mind.
Absolutely, because these principles are just as relevant today as they were nearly a century ago.
It's a timeless guide to building better relationships and achieving your goals.
And who doesn't want that?
That's it for our deep dive into how to win friends and influence people. We hope you learned something new and can apply Carnegie's timeless wisdom to your own life.
Thanks for listening.